I just finished reading a book, but it didn't feel like I was reading alone because this one is actually part of a book club initiative called the Book Tour. So by the time this book got to me, 4 other readers already got to read it, got to annotate, and leave their notes around the margins. There are highlights, circled words, notes, and sticky tabs around. Annotating books isn't exactly a new skill or a new trend to happen on the internet, but I really wanted to see what it would be like to read a book with somebody else's minds in it. Because when the book first got to me, it obviously wasn't blank because I could already see all of these tabs over here, but we've also managed to document the different readers in this book as well, which has actually helped me kind of understand and pinpoint the traces people left behind in such a way that a black pen belongs to reader A, a red pen belongs to reader B, these certain colored tabs belong to reader C, and so on. So I can imagine reading a person's annotated book is an experience, but reading 4 other people's annotated book, conversations or arguments, reactions in between the margins is definitely a more rich experience, and I want to talk to you more about that, as there definitely are several factors that shape the experience of reading a heavily annotated book such as this. Number 1, the order of readers. I reckon the first reader really sets the tone for annotating this book, because if they highlighted everything, it would feel pretty chaotic and just like all over the place. But if it's more subtle, you really have more room to explore on your own, react on your own, and form thoughts of your own as well. Plus, it's actually nice to see reactions and then reactions to that reaction, saying stuff like same, or I relate, or I feel you, such that it feels like an answer to the first reaction. So I personally found that really cool. It kind of feels like an RRL, if you guys know what I mean, if we want to get fancy or academic in here. Number 2, your own annotation habits. Because guys, I don't annotate, and if I do annotate, it's usually just highlighting on my e-reader, and that's just for particular quotes that really stick out to me. So in my head, I don't usually annotate, and seeing other people's marks, handwritings, color choices definitely felt super different than if I were adding them myself. Like, would you just look at the tabs? I honestly think it's so cool that somehow, even as this book has passed 5 different readers, we all kind of agreed, even without discussing it, that we wanted the tabs to match the colors on the cover of the book. There are yellows that match this small text over here. There are grays and different blues as well. I think the color that only really sticks out are the maroons, but somehow it still feels and looks really cohesive, especially when you look from the side. Plus, I personally appreciate that we all also kind of decided and really committed to sticking to pen choices and pen colors as well. So even if the penmanship is different across readers, definitely helped me a lot more knowing that I could color code even the text and the handwriting. Third is how often you think in full thoughts. I found myself reacting in one-word sentences like bruh, wow, or like short reactions like oh no, and it was a little foreign to me to see like full sentences. Like, there are actually annotations here in this book that go around like I think the blah 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 blah. I don't really want to talk too much about it because I don't want to spoil this book for you guys if you haven't read it. But because some readers leave long side notes and some readers just leave a couple words, it really changes the pace in your reading as well, because I find myself really zoned into the text of the book, and then it feels like reading Wattpad comments where I have to like stop for a bit and read the side comments just to avoid spoiling myself, which I'll get to later on. Number 4 is something I sort of touched about briefly when I talked about my annotation style, that is emotional and analytical annotations. Some readers react more emotionally, so it was common for me to read reactions like oh no, wow, felt, I relate, or oh my goodness. While there were also other readers that tried to analyze characters and themes. They even have theories of their own over here. They also marked passages that they felt like would be important later on in the book, which also affected how my attention was drawn to particular passages as well. Because yes, a good book has hard-hitting food for thought, and if it really stirs you into thinking, into having this itch to point out a bigger conversation and a bigger thought, then it means it was effective in that aspect, right? Personally, for me, I was more drawn to passages that had like one word or short reactions, probably because humans are particularly drawn towards more emotionally charged instances. Or maybe this just says a lot about my TikTok attention span. Because while others can argue that it depends on which kind of annotation you notice first, I can only talk about what type I was personally drawn to. It was just easier for me to kind of compartmentalize and kind of set aside a longer note than a shorter note, because my eyes are so drawn to those short pieces of text. Number 5, spoilers or reading ahead. Like I said, my eyes were drawn to shorter pieces of text, so it's so much easier for me to point my attention towards something even if I'm already technically reading ahead. So I had to keep reminding myself to be like, okay, try to pause and take it slow because I may be on this part of the book and I'm reading an annotation at this part of the book, you know what I mean? Without really thinking too consciously about that habit as well. And obviously, if there's a major spoiler, then that changes the suspense, considering that this is like a crime thriller book too. Number 6, the density of annotations. There are some pages that are heavily annotated, and I can imagine this can feel kind of chaotic to other readers, while there are other pages that are more lightly annotated, so there's definitely more room for people to write, to make thoughts. So you can kind of already tell which parts of the book are like major plot points because they can feel a little more chaotic or noisy, while others are a little more quiet and kind of slow. And yeah, that was just such an interesting dynamic to me personally and really helped with my experience reading it in a way that when a lot of things were happening, I also know that a lot of people or a lot of readers were taking active participation and writing down their thoughts on those particular scenes. So I feel like even if it was highly charged, I wasn't really alone with dealing through everything and like thinking about a lot of things as well. Because I'm happy to report, I also didn't feel a lot of pressure annotating every single chapter because other readers had already left their mark in such a way that I was able to resonate and even relate to a lot of them. So because we had similar or the same thoughts, I wasn't as compelled to really just write down every single thing I thought of, which was what I was worried about when I was first getting into this. Number 7 and the last is the medium of annotation. And I want to point this out because when I see a page like this, it's so easy for me to kind of glide my eyes over here on the margin and focus on what people are writing. But for some reason, when it comes to like highlighted text, it's easier for my eyes and my brain to kind of ignore that that's not part of the printed book and just read as I usually read a book. I'm not sure if it was the choice in color per se, but in terms of like ignoring and stopping myself to read, I feel like the easiest to read are the ones on the margins. The underlines, the encircles, and the highlights are stuff that don't really bother me per se. And the sticky note is a medium that for me personally is easier to kind of set aside. Like I can revisit that piece of text after I've read the whole page. Now let's talk about my experience getting into it. At first, I thought it was a little distracting at times, especially at the start, but the more that I got into the pacing of the book and even of the annotators themselves, it started feeling more like a conversation because again, there were a lot of commentary that resonated with my own commentary and my opinions and thoughts as well as a reader and as a person. And because I felt seen in that regard, it was so much easier to get to the conversations that were placed on the margins. It was also kind of amusing seeing them react and then knowing that I could react to their reactions and even seeing reader B react and reader C reacting to that reaction. It was such a nice interaction to see on paper and not just have it be through a Discord call or a face-to-face meeting with your book club members. And another interesting experience was kind of seeing the patterns in the highlights, in the circles, even in the annotations. It kind of feels like a glimpse into how that person reads because yes, it oddly feels like an intimate experience getting into somebody else's thoughts when it comes to reading a book, and quite a charged book at that. I don't know, it was just such an interesting experience. Like I think about it and I smile, like in an amusing way, but also it was a challenge in a good way because I wasn't exactly just reading the story as is. I was also reading how other people experienced the same story while I was experiencing it myself. And the moment I started writing my own annotations, that's where the entire experience shifted again because I was now leaving my own marks for the potential next reader. Granted, for this book tour, I am the last as agreed upon in my book club, but if somebody were ever to borrow this particular copy and read all of the different annotations, I know that I've left my mark here. And as interesting as it was, I don't think it's how I naturally like to read, particularly because I don't usually annotate my books and I'm a little apprehensive about reading spoilers ahead because I really have to like keep reminding myself of that and not to read ahead or to skip ahead. That being said though, it's still such a fascinating experience, not just being able to read a book, but to read other people's notes on it as well. As I like to say, reading like this doesn't feel like reading alone. It feels like stepping into a conversation that already happened. So albeit an enjoyable experience overall, I just don't think I want to read every single book like this, but I wouldn't mind dabbling into it here and there, especially if I know it's a more difficult piece of text. Or maybe I could even host one for my favorite books and see what other people think about that. That sounds really interesting actually now that I think about it. Now I want to know, would you read a book like this or would you rather experience it on your own? And on another note, if you do annotate, share with me your annotation style in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!